Let's get to our next guest, Doug Holtz-Eakin, American Action Forum President and former Director of the Congressional Budget Office, to discuss more. Thank you for joining us, Doug. It seems as if we keep getting this can kicked down the road to the point where there seems to be almost a sense of apathy that your average investor or your average American isn't really as concerned about this. Why do you think that's happening, and how concerned should we be about when this does officially end up hitting the economy?
Well, I'm deeply concerned because in the 21st century, the debt has only risen, even relative to the size of the economy, GDP. We've seen debt to GDP rise without any ability to get it to level off and stabilize it. So that can continue. That has deep economic implications. Over the next 10 years, for example, the federal government is on schedule to borrow another $20 trillion in deficits. That kind of repeated going into the capital markets is going to crowd out the private sector. It's going to hurt investments in technologies and equipment and software and human capital, and that hurts productivity and the standard of living. And so this isn't something where kicking the can down the road avoids the problem. The problem is here already. We're paying for this in little ways every day, but there is no real attention being paid to the debt in Congress. And it's something that I really hope that the Congress and the public will wake up to the dangers and begin to take it on.
Doug, and you're one of those that have been on our air sort of raising that flag about the growing debt for some time now. But let's talk about what's playing out in D.C. right now, because as I see it, there is the risk of the growing debt, which is sort of a medium to long term problem. But we're still talking about a potential government shutdown come March, right? I mean, six weeks later, what does that achieve when you consider that the House Speaker already has been getting pushback within his own party?
I'm a skeptic about exactly what's been accomplished here. The problems that were evident on September 30th, 2023 were evident approaching the January 19th and February 2nd deadlines. They'll be there on March 1st and March 8th, the new deadlines in this short-term funding bill. So I don't see any resolution other than some real compromise, which both sides have been unwilling to do thus far. So I don't see a lot being accomplished. This is literally just pushing the problem away for another 6 weeks. Hopefully, we can get the government funded for a fiscal year that began October 1st of last year. And then we have to turn to the next fiscal year. So there's an enormous amount of work that needs to be done, and the Congress is really not accomplishing a great deal.
So, Doug, are the markets right to kind of shrug this off again? I mean, that's sort of become the reaction, right? Which is a government shutdown. Okay, maybe it'll happen. It'll probably be averted. We've got another potential deadline come March. At what point does it become something that you think investors can't ignore?
I don't think a government shutdown per se is a great threat to markets, to the economy as a whole. We've had shutdowns. They have a really tiny impact on the overall growth path of the economy. Mostly it consists of shifting things around in time. You put them off and accomplish them later. And so you recover anything you lose during the shutdown. So I don't think that's a big concern. I would say the major concern should be that if the government gets shut down, the rating agencies take this as another piece of evidence that the U.S. is unable to manage its finances, and you get another negative watch, downgrade of the credit rating. That's a big deal, and investors should care about that. The larger issue here is the capacity of our political system to manage the federal finances. And on a short-term basis, that is funding the government. It doesn't seem to be able to do that. And on a long-term basis, controlling the debt, it has been unable to do that. Both are really not good signs for the U.S.
And Doug, obviously, the U.S. has gotten a bit more comfortable with running a deficit and having a bit of lax fiscal discipline, because you have had the Chinas and the Saudi Arabias of the world, buying these treasuries. What would be the tipping point, though, that would let us know that we're actually in trouble here, that the U.S. does need to wake up and come up with a longer-term solution rather than these sort of stopgap measures and get some more fiscal discipline?
Well, there are two scenarios. One is the one you just described, which is world capital markets looking at the United States and saying, okay, we no longer believe that you can repay principal and interest in a timely fashion, and you're not getting any more money. And that's the sovereign debt meltdown that we have seen around the globe, Greece, Portugal, Argentina. That's a long way off for the U.S. It remains a reserve currency. The world gives us a lot more rope, and we use it to our own detriment. So I don't think that's the right way to think about it. I think there are other things that will trigger it first. Number one, the U.S. really does have a growth crisis. In the 20th century, up to 2000, GDP per capita grew at about 2.4% per year. And in the 21st century, it's been 1.4% per year. That means we've foregone about $19,000 a person in income in the 21st century. We'd have 19,000 more each. I would like my 19. I don't know about you. That's the problem people have in seeing reaching the American dream, the stagnation we feel. And it gets compounded by the fact that the big programs they're counting on, Social Security and Medicare notably, both have big financing problems. So we're going to get more political crisis out of poor growth and more sort of political crisis out of these programs financially failing than we're going to get out of world capital markets. I think those will come first. Those need to be dealt with.
And of course, you do tend to get a lot of political grandstanding, especially in an election year. But Harvard University's Ken Rogoff, he said that no matter who wins the U.S. election, that the U.S. is still going to end up borrowing more. So when people are thinking about the blame game or how they're thinking about the... So do you agree with that?
Yeah, Ken and I are the dismal scientists. Here's the problem, honestly. Over the next 10 years, the federal government is going to spend $80 trillion. 10 of that's going to be interest. A big chunk of what's spending now is just paying off previous interest. 20 will be the annual decisions that Congress makes. That's what we're fighting about now in funding the government. 50 are what we think of as entitlement programs. And of that 50, 32 are Social Security and Medicare. So that's where the money is. President Biden has said he's not going to touch Social Security and Medicare. Candidate Trump has said he's not going to touch Social Security and Medicare. That's where the problem is. They're not going to touch it. So I'm with Ken. This election solves none of these deep fiscal problems because the leading candidates are not willing to take them on.
Something tells me, Doug, you're going to be back on our show with that warning, raising that flag. Always good to get your perspective. Doug Holtz-Eakin, American Action Forum President and former Director of the Congressional Budget Office.